Welcome to the Natasha Helfer Podcast. To help keep this podcast going, please consider donating at natashahelfer.com and share this episode. To watch the video of this podcast, you can subscribe to Natasha's channel on YouTube and follow her professional Facebook page at Natasha Helfer, LCMFT, CST-S. You can also find all her cool resources at natashahelfer.com. The information shared on this program is informational and should not be considered therapy. This podcast addresses many topics around mental health and sexuality and may not be suitable for minors. Some topics may elicit a trigger or emotional response, so please care for yourself accordingly. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or feelings of Natasha Helfer or the Natasha Helfer Podcast. We provide a platform for open and diverse discussions, and it is important to recognize that different perspectives may be shared. We encourage our listeners to engage in critical thinking and form their own opinions. The intro and outro music for these episodes is by Otter Creek. Thank you for listening.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Natasha Helfer Podcast. I am very excited to be interviewing Christine Forner. I'm going to give you her bio here in a minute. But on this podcast, we really try to go after shame anywhere we can get it, whether it's systemic shame, religious shame, family, cultural shame, all the many systems that kind of place a lot of expectations on us and cause a lot of problems as far as our well-being and our ability to thrive in the world. So that's what we're about here. And Christine Forner is a seasoned clinician. She's an educator. She's also an author based in Alberta, Canada. And she has over 35 years of experience working with clients affected by coercive control, domestic violence, sexual abuse, and chronic neglect. So although we differ, I think I kind of work mostly with people coming out of high demand religion. I think the themes that we're both interested are very, we're going to get along just fine. She specializes in traumatic dissociation, developmental trauma, and the neurobiology of mindfulness. She has a master's in social work and is certified in sensorimotor psychotherapy and is internationally recognized as a thought leader in this intersection of dissociation and mindfulness. Her work illuminates the role of patriarchy and misogyny in the genesis of trauma, and she developed the concept, which we'll talk about today, of therapeutic nurturing, and the term also secure fullness, which reframes the need for nurturing as a biologically essential force that organizes emotional safety, regulation, and human health. She has an upcoming book titled The Craving: How Prolonged Fear Shaped Humanity. So, we'll look that up when it comes out. You can find her on christineforner.com, on Instagram, on X, and on Substack under the @TheFierceNurture. I will link to all of that. So if you're interested in her work, you can find her easily. So hello, Christine. Welcome to the program.
Hello, Natasha. I'm so very grateful to be here. Thank you.
You're so welcome. I'm so excited to have you. You seem like anytime I find people that I wouldn't normally run across that are interested in similar themes, I'm just delighted. So
I think there's a lot of us, actually.
There are a lot of us for sure. Well, let me ask you, as much as you're comfortable, I gave a professional bio, but tell us a little bit about yourself personally. What made you interested in all these topics, and anything you want to share about just kind of how life brought you to this space?
The story sort of makes sense now that I look back at it, but when you're in it, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I was a very vibrant, athletic, very feral child. Me and my sisters our childhood was running, and we were extraordinarily athletic. We were all competitive swimmers, and I think, we hear these hero journeys and we hear these stories out in the wider world of what makes someone become sort of a hero. And these are sort of comic book themes and that kind of stuff, and Star Wars kind of themes. I think for a lot of us who don't have sort of that hero umbrella, but we do have these moments in our life that impact us throughout. And the moment that happened to me was when I was 13 years old. I was assaulted by a swim coach. I didn't remember it until I was 41. I was a therapist. I was a sexual assault therapist for 20 some odd years. I was doing long-term therapy with sexual assault survivors for 12 years. And I didn't know until I started doing deeper work. And then it took about 5 years for that to come out. So That's my origin story. Like, something happened to me and I needed to figure out what it was. And, shortly after that, the wheels fell off my life. My mom and dad really didn't have any idea because they couldn't even have fathomed what had happened. And I spun out. I stopped swimming. I never went back into athletics until much, much later in my life. And I just sort of tumbleweed through my life with this pulling me. And over the years, I was always, I didn't want to work at a sexual assault center. It was the first place that I did my practicum, but it was like working at a sexual assault center doing public education with youth versus working at a center for like Alzheimer's and dementia. And I was like 19 at the time, and I really didn't want to work with anybody who had dementia. I wanted to work with adolescents, so that's the one I took. Even at the time when I was at the training, I had all of these things happen to me. Like I saw various educational films on child pornography, and I would go throw up and just think that that's just like a normal response. It can be a normal response, but it was part of what had happened to me. And, looking back when I'm 40 years old at my life, at that point, I was a board member of an international organization for complex trauma and dissociation, the International Society for Trauma and Dissociation. I was highly trained, highly educated. I had my master's thesis on dissociation and mindfulness. I had done all of these things, and this other piece of information came up. So, sort of the deepest question that influenced me was, how and why did this happen? And I think from sort of that in the background, that fueling me, I've been able to put a lot of pieces together and figure out, why can a human being groom a child and do what adults do to a child, which I was at the time. I was 13 years old when it happened. I just needed to know how and why. And I think I have, in many, many ways, figured it out. And it's by understanding what trauma does to us, what fear does to us, but also what safety does to us. And my research and my interest and my drive has come to the conclusion that we're not meant to be hurt, in ever so simple terms. But that's basically the premise of how I came up with how I got hurt and how I got healed.
Wow. Well, that's a lot.
There's a lot of other ones in there, but we'll go with that one.
Right. So, well, why don't we start with just, since we are going to be talking about trauma and sexual assault in particular, do you mind just giving kind of the audience an overview of what we are talking about as clinicians when we're talking about dissociation? I'm not sure. I mean, I think that's a fairly common word, and maybe most people know it, but I think it's a pretty complex concept. And it can show up in a lot of different ways. So do you want to just kind of dive into that a little bit?
So dissociation is something that's actually always made sense to me. When I started working in long-term therapy, all of my clients had either dissociative identity disorder, complex trauma, and or like an otherwise specified, unspecified type of dissociation. So probably I would say 90% of my caseload over this last however many years that I've been doing long-term therapy, 90% have been people with dissociation. So what dissociation is, in extraordinarily simple terms, is it is a body and a mind that has perceived the next thing that's going to happen is death. So the body and the mind are doing everything it can to either prepare for it or prevent it. So that means that when we start to dissociate, our bodies fill us full of endogenous cannabinoids. It gets secreted out the gut. It gets secreted in the bloodstream. It also gets secreted out the bone marrow. So the body fills itself up even before the mind can be part of the picture. It fills the whole entire body up with like an anesthetic type of chemical. So it's a numbing agent. Then the brain also starts to participate. The physical structures of the brain start to participate. The insula plays a part of it. So the insula stops doing what it's supposed to do. So the insulin's job is to take data from the body, the affective information that the body is constantly communicating. It cuts it off. And so the data that comes from the body can no longer go up to the front part of the mind. So the mind still thinks, but it's missing large pieces of data. It's a way of us not knowing what's actually happening to us. So the anesthetic comes in, we can't feel what we feel, and we don't know what we know. The other thing that happens is the thalamus, which is a brain structure that is designed to put all of our sense perceptions together so it's a cohesive narrative, that gets switched. So instead of being integrative, it's disintegrative, right? So we disintegrate what's happening so that we might, sometimes we can, if we like, our ears might start ringing, but also the central nervous system takes a part in it and becomes extraordinarily inflamed. So sometimes when people dissociate, they'll hear sort of a sense in like their ears might start to ring or their eyes might change. These are actually physical responses to not even a near death experience, but a death experience. So if the body's anticipating that we might die, then the body will tend to put us into an active defense or an emergency cascade response that is active. So this is your fleeing, your fighting, your panic. Even an attachment cry is an active defense. Dissociation is the brakes to that system because we are no longer running from a predator. We're in the predator's mouth, and it's a different way of trying to survive. It's kind of like playing dead. The weird part about it is that humans can still act like we're functioning. We can still go about our day and be dissociating. There's a couple weird things that are weird about humans when it comes to emergency cascade responses that seems to be different than any other animal on the planet. And that weirdness actually, when you understand how we evolved, makes sense. But in our daily lives, it tends to not make sense because most of the things that scare us enough to bring out a dissociative response, we don't really remember, or we don't really connect with, or it's really numbed out or dulled out the intensity of it. And if you experience this sort of under the age of 5 or even under the age of 10 or under the age of 15, because life is so precarious when we're little, and because most of the time when we are that little, it's the people around us that we depend upon to survive. If we are super little, the danger increases. So children tend to dissociate way more than adults do. But also because children are their bodies do not, they respond to fear. So if the adults around them are frightening, that is perceived as an ongoing threat. So they tend to dissociate more and know less about what's going on in their lives and function in a way that aligns with the people around them in order to stay safe.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. It makes sense. And as you're talking, I'm just is there anybody that escapes this?
No.
It's just a part of being human, right?
No, it's a part of being human in a misogynistic patriarchal world. And I think I need to explain what I mean by misogyny and patriarchy, because what I mean by misogyny and patriarchy is a little different. I am a card carrying women's studies major from 1995. I have been influenced by a lot of the feminist bell hooks and Audre Lorde and Gloria Steinem. These were my educators when I was going through my first degree back in the 90s. So I do understand how misogyny is understood from a framework, from sort of a philosophical kind of way. I approach misogyny from a biological process kind of way. What makes it so that half the population does physical things that are violent? And I know when I say this, a lot of men jump in and say, not all men. And I comprehend that defense, but there is the reality of what we experience. There is a profound amount of violence in our world. What I mean by misogyny is not just the hatred of women. I think that's what it looks like now, and that's how we understand it now. But I think it originally started as a phobia and a violent reaction to nurturing. So what do I mean by nurturing? I don't mean service. I don't mean servitude. I don't mean sentimentality. I mean the neurophysiological processes that we evolved to co-regulate others and ourselves. So empathy is part of the nurturing branch. Attunement is part of the nurturing branch. Interoception is part of the nurturing branch. Complex language is part of the nurturing branch. A sense of self or identity is part of the nurturing branch. Long-term memory is also part of the nurturing branch. Like all of the things that kind of make us a unique species are all kind of designed to ensure that I'm okay and you're okay and that you're okay and I'm okay. And so nurturing isn't just about being nice, although it can be. It's not just about cooking and cleaning, although it can be. But nurturing is really about co-regulation, how my body can help your body and your body can help my body find a place of safe and secure. And about 12,000 years ago, it seems to be something happened where things started going wrong and misogyny started happening. But misogyny really basically is this phobia of Homo sapien nurturing. And patriarchy, which a lot of people, sort of talk about systems ruled by men, I see patriarchy really as much better understood as systems that emulate psychopathy and psychopathic traits. Psychopathy, psychopathic traits, psychopathic adjacent traits, those are sort of the language that I use. But basically, it's the fight response gone amok when we talk about emergency cascade defenses. And the fight response, because of what it does to us neurophysiologically, but also like sort of what it does to a human mind and brain and how it works, fight tends to be the one that keeps, it's dominating. It is about controlling other people. And if you like understanding what happens when humans get scared, some people will fight, most people don't. But the people who fight have overrepresented and took over humanity. And we've been sort of trying to survive ever since.
Okay, so out of all the response, like the trauma responses that people are used to hearing, like fight, flight, freeze, fawn, those types of things, you're saying most people do not fall under the fight category when they're faced with a threat, but the people who do are the people who have taken over, in a sense, systemically. And that happens to be primarily males.
Yes. Males are very vulnerable to quite a bit of things that females aren't really vulnerable to. So in utero, male offspring are much more affected or vulnerable to maternal distress. So if a mom's really stressed out throughout a pregnancy, there is a chance that it can impact the development of the way the brain develops with male offspring, much more than female offspring. So it's sort of like a 80-20 or 75-25% ratio. So that, and I get this from a lot of work that Alan Shore did in his book, The Development of the Unconscious. He has a whole chapter about, why men seem to be more affected. And one of that is in utero, the brain is supposed to be a little bit bigger on the right side than the left side at birth. And this can help sort of scaffold or sort of assist an infant in being able to be okay with feeling their feelings. Because an infant comes out feeling their feelings the exact same way as adults do. Like the affective circuitry and the way it communicates is exactly the same at birth as it is as an adult. So babies feel. They feel as intensely, both physical touch, sight, sound, taste, touch, smell. Sound is a little different. And most of the development at birth is this, it is basically the same. But infants are incredibly sensory beings. They're going through their day feeling things. There is an expectation that those feelings are going to be met immediately. This is considered sort of a post-birth gestation. So the human infant is expecting a post-birth gestation. So it's expecting to be held and have its needs met as fast as it did in utero. And in order for that to happen, we are an alloparenting species, which means there's supposed to be about 6 people taking care of one human infant. And in our time, that makes people's heads pop off because the amount of resources that it takes to raise one human infant the way we were designed it's all backwards, right? So our resources are going to the people that it shouldn't versus the resources to the people that it should. So when a
Wow.
human, what's that?
Wow. I'm learning a lot from you today.
So when a human infant is born, it's an incredibly sensory being, and it is expecting those sensations to be soothed, right? So if you have a baby, though, that has stress in utero and the right side and the left side are the same size, that baby is extraordinarily freaked out by its own feelings, and it gets scared. And because infants have no other defense that they can use, they tend to dissociate. If it's male offspring, the encouragement from birth on to act and behave as a true psychopath does is really tense, right? So when a baby boy is born, just the messages of you're not supposed to feel, you're not supposed to be cuddled. So one of the reasons is that there's a vulnerability in utero. So if a mom's stressed out, there's a vulnerability. If the baby is born male offsprings, there's a vulnerability. When Martin Treacher is another scientist who talks about this. He's been talking about this for like a long time. He often talks about how the things that he has seen that seem to do the most damage from a neurobiological perspective. So he's a neuroscientist, and he said in his experience, it is little girls who are sexually assaulted at the age of 3 and 13. All sexual assault is the worst, but there seems to be something particularly damaging if it's done at the age of 3 and 13. So it kind of goes up. An equivalent to that, sorry.
Are you saying between the ages of 3 and 13, or there's something special about 3 and 13?
There's something happening at 3 and at 13 that make this damage that much more damaging. Right? So you always have maximum damage, and then for whatever reason, this makes more maximum damage. And the equivalent to that he has seen is male infants being neglected between the ages of 0 and 3. So we do know that male infants are more sensitive to stress. They're more sensitive to being left alone. They're more sensitive to neglect. And basically, from a neurophysiological evolutionary perspective, it actually does make sense. So when a female is being born and made and born and raised, females have, like, we've got extra endogenous opioids so that we can actually tolerate more pain. Our bodies are designed to tolerate more stress. And the other thing that happens is that we're sort of born with extra nurturing padding because there is the potential for us to give life, to support that life, and to do the things that you need to do to raise a Homo sapien baby. And male infants just don't have that. So they need more time in nurturing school. They develop slower, and there's a design to it. So that males, by the time they're an adult, they have the same nurturing capacities that females do if they're raised in nurturing school properly. If they're not raised in nurturing schools, the wheels fall off. The other thing that happens is throughout our lives, our emergency cascade responses, they tend to make instant decisions on what is the best course of action to survive. So for me, I'm a 56-year-old woman. I am not as fast as I used to be. I'm not as strong as I used to be, but I'm not as fast as like a 20-year-old male, and I'm not as strong as a 20-year-old male. So for me, fighting a tiger is not a good idea. For me, playing dead is probably the best thing to do. Whereas a 20-year-old might actually go into fight, and fight actually might help. So I think we live in a world that has sort of seen all of these other defenses, the fleas and the fawns and the shame responses, as like not good. And fight has been excused. Like fight has sort of been crowned as not being an emergency response. Fight has been sort of crowned as just is, but it is actually an emergency response. So there's like sort of these big sort of factors on why men become far more violent than women.
And speak again to this. This is fascinating that you're putting these words together. I haven't heard psychopathy and psychopathic traits with patriarchy.
Yeah.
But although, when you say it, it makes perfect sense. We do.
Yes.
I've been talking about how we gender, you have all these studies where you just position a baby in a pink bow or position a baby in the same baby in a blue outfit, and it gets treated
Yes.
significantly different by the same people who were just holding a baby they didn't realize was a different baby.
Yeah.
So tell me more about that.
Well,
About the psychopathy language that you're using.
so I think we gotta sort of, I roll back to the beginning, right? And I go back to the beginning of what makes humans humans. We've all sort of been told this evolutionary story that we were a relative that was very similar to chimpanzees or bonobos, and the trees went away and we started walking on the forest and we started grabbing rocks and making weapons, tools and weapons. And that because we started walking on the plains and using, it's called endurance hunting, where, you know, it's believed that we just started chasing animals and chasing them down, that's what makes humans humans. The thing that's sort of missing is that there's a big gap of information. Like, how does a prey animal become sort of this apex predator that we're thought to have been? Like what is the catalyst besides the trees going away? But when you take a look at like a predator's neurobiology, you take a look at how a predator's teeth are, how a predator's body is, a predator has predator temperament, right? It will, like lions will lay in the middle of the African savannah with its like tummy out in the wild thinking, I'm great. It can go into a hunt response and come out of that hunt response and then just like not eat for 2 weeks because they tend to only eat. But they have teeth that can eat the meat and they have digestive systems that are prepared for that. We got none of that. We still have the temperament, the nervous system of a prey animal, of an animal that has been preyed upon, like chimpanzees, like bonobos. Mm-hmm. So this notion that we became this hunter doesn't fit. Mm. What actually does fit, and when you start to look into, you know, how much fire influenced us. So fire has thought as being a tool that we used. There's another group of people who basically say fire was the thing that made humans humans. And the more research that I did, it turns out that probably fire most likely is the thing that domesticated us. What is domestication? Domestication is the expectation of being cared for. Mm. Our animals are becoming domesticated. Our dogs and cats are becoming domesticated. These animals, I don't know, if we were all go away, some dogs would be okay, but some dogs certainly wouldn't be okay because they are so domesticated. And dogs are starting to watch TV. Dogs are starting to like communicate and touch buttons. And I imagine, so I use the example of dogs because we have been with fire for sure as part of hearth and home for at least 2 million years. Humans are about, 300,000 years old. We might be a little bit older than that. But the species that came before us, and likely the species before that, have been using fire, and likely the species before that. Mm-hmm. So fire is the thing that really started influencing us. So what does fire do? So when you're hanging out with fire all the time, fire actually does give food security in a multiple of ways. One, in the wild, when there's a grass fire, there are little animals, rodents, that tend to be charred. And a charred animal is actually easy to digest. So in the wild, animals will go towards a fire and get some ample food. So there is a chance that some 4, maybe even 6 million years ago, they came out, our relatives came out of a forest fire and somebody grabbed a stick of fire, because we do know that chimpanzees and bonobos will play with fire. They don't hold it, but it is something that they're not terribly afraid of. And they do eat the charcoal because it helps with their gut digestion. So chimpanzees and bonobos are familiar with fire. It just so happens that probably one of our ancestors held the stick and didn't let go. So we started to sort of probably learn very quickly, if you start little fires, you're going to have food. And then over time, we would have learned how to keep food, because if you can use ashes to keep vegetables and fruit for a really long time, and also smoking meat. So over the 2 million years that we were hanging out with fire, we start to have food security. The other thing that fire does is it gives you environmental security. It keeps you warm. And the other thing it does is it keeps you safe from predation. So if for at least 2 million years, maybe longer, because we do acknowledge that fire changed our gut, it changed our muscles, it changed our jaw, it changed our brain. That's pretty well-known science. We also agree that fire assisted us with culture. So like we were hanging around each other, and this is where we started talking and we started developing language. But I'm arguing that fire changed our nervous system. Fire made us tame. Fire took us out of the predator and prey dyad and put us into this safe place where we started developing the capacity to self-regulate. Now, we know from science that people who are truly psychopathic, and there's not really that many of them, these are people who are born with brain damage. They're born with brain structures that are not fully developed. We do know that this can happen with certain chemicals. Alcohol can do this. So we do know that the mother can ingest things that can actually impact the brain development. We know that stress does this. So people who are truly psychopathic, they're born with brain damage, but they do tend to not be able to self-regulate it at all. They don't have the brain structures that are capable of self-regulation. Empathy is a mechanism for co and self-regulation. So empathy, there's brain structures inside of me. So if you started having a really upsetting moment happen, I'm going to feel it. Even though you're in Utah and I'm in Alberta, but we're talking to each other, I'm going to be impacted by you. So my brain structure is going to go pain, pain, pain. I'm going to start feeling your pain. Now, because I'm a therapist who works with people who are in pain all the time, I have a really easy time to drop in and calm myself down without even really thinking about it anymore. It just is automatic now. But that's empathy. But the other thing that empathy does is that when we're holding our infants who have zero capacity to communicate their distress and an expectation for zero distress, empathy is one of the ways, and attunement is one of those ways that we gather data about our infants' physiology. That's part of nurturing. And people who are psychopathic, this doesn't work. So their brain or their bodies might be in a massive amount of distress that is only managed by probably dissociation, and there's, because it's not directly researched, the way that we study psychopathy is we tend to interview psychopaths, which is always going to be flawed because they are chronic liars and they don't have interoception, right? So they don't have the ability to really drop in and self-reflect. They might intellectualize, they can think, because one of the things that happens when we're dissociate, the front brain becomes hyper-aroused. When we're in fight flight, when we're in an active, the front brain becomes hypo-aroused, so the front brain stops working. The back brain works, so we feel a lot, but we don't think a lot. When we dissociate, we can think a lot and not feel a lot. So they're probably managing through dissociation, then moves into fight. One of the things that happens with fight, you hurt other people, you get a hit. There's something that happens, that there's some sort of quietening agent, so they probably dissociate when they're hurting other people. So they're using cruelty as a way of sort of fake regulating because they can't calm down. Something happened about 12,000 years ago. There was a big something where we lost our capacity to nurture. We don't really know because the powers that be don't really study this, right? So this is me pulling from all sorts of places, but something probably happened 12,000 years ago. We lost our capacity to be in that fire circle of safety. Lots of people went into emergency response. And the thing about humans, when we go into an emergency response, it's really hard to come out of it. And it's really hard to come out of it by yourself. So when we're coming out of these emergency responses, all of the things that were dissociated, the feelings and the experiences, they have to be moved into our base setting, which is safe and secure. That base setting is to know what we know and feel what we feel, put the right words, the right meaning, and the right context to what's happening inside of us so that it can be cared for, so that it can be tended to, so that it can be soothed, so it can be processed, so it can be grieved, so it can be expressed. And when somebody is psychopathic, when their body starts to want to go into that natural place of healing, they start to feel things and they can't handle it. So they tend to stay in a fight response. They tend to stay in a chronic, absolute state of fight. And it's sort of like the energy is so intense that it becomes still. right? So they have no idea that they're in a fight response. And the only time that we can really detect when they're in a fight response is when they're actually attacking.
So basically, you're saying so having a fight response and harming other people becomes, in a way, the dissociation features of people who have developed in this particular way.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of like it's kind of like self-help or self-harm on steroids. So, I work with a lot of people with dissociation, and hurting themselves is part of the package because they're in a freeze response of sorts, a shame response, a fawn response. But when they have a big, big feeling, so if the system is trying to heal and a big, big feeling comes up, they don't really have the nurturing muscles yet to be able to self-regulate. But because they still have empathy, because they still have a connection to people, because they still ask themselves questions, like most emergency responses have all the ingredients to heal. Fight responses, if it's been there from in utero, those things aren't there. If it happens after birth, so it's like psychopathic adjacent, they can be there, but they tend to rely on fight an awful lot. Fight gets a lot of rewards. Fight gets a lot of benefit that other ones don't. Fight gets a lot of free passes that a lot of other ones don't. So, from the grand scheme of things, the people who are using fight, the world has encouraged them to use fight. So for them, they don't even see it as being weird, strange, wrong, or bad. But for those of us that don't use fight, self-harm is a way that it changes how we feel. So it hurting our bodies tend to either pop people into a dissociative response, like a deeper dissociative response, because the body's secreting endogenous opioids, or it can wake the system up and like give it like sort of an adrenaline shot or a cortisol shot or something like that. So self-harm is a way of it's a substitute for regulation. Harming another person is so against the human contract that their body is impacted by other people, but they're not really aware of it. It's kind of like self on steroids. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So meaning people with these propensities don't have the same response in harming another person that maybe those who would.
Yeah, right. So like if we take the example of like honestly, one of the greatest features of psychopathy, which isn't really in like the Hare's checklist of psychopaths or, the people who are studying psychopathy, cruelty is probably the prime feature. Besides the impulsivity, besides the lack of empathy, besides the, criminality, or besides the other features that are part of psychopathy or psychopathic adjacent, honestly, cruelty is the greatest feature. So, typically where there are vulnerable people and positions of unlimited power, you're going to have a high percentage of people who are psychopathic or psychopathic adjacent because they get free range to be as cruel as they want and nobody questions it, typically. So you can see high percentages in like clergy. You can see high percentages in religious figures. You can see high percentages in like Boy Scout leaders. You can see high percentages in psychiatric units. You can see high percentages with like anybody who's got a lot of power. And that power, politics, the judicial system, really anything where there is lots of power and you get to sort of be as mean or cruel as you want to be and nobody really questions it, you're going to have a high percentage of people who have psychopathic or psychopathic traits. In the academic world, most of what I'm saying is like, that's not what psychopathy is. But I'm kind of done with that. Like, honestly, as a human being, I'm just, the way that psychology is understood, if you take a look at the founding fathers, because certainly wasn't mothers, but the founding fathers of psychology, a lot of them have a lot of psychopathic traits. Mm-hmm. Not all of them, but a lot of them. Mm-hmm. And their theories are still being taught. Their theories are still being seen as being accurate on what humans are. And in my experience, it just doesn't fit. It doesn't match.
And so just to be clear, you're saying it's not that these positions of power create psychopathy, it's that psychopathic people will rise to the top because the system promotes that.
Yes. Yeah. Like psychopathy happens in the first months of, like, it's in utero, it's epigenetic. It could be epigenetic. It's in utero, and it's in the first 5 years of life.
Yeah. Okay. Well, with the time we have left, because I can tell you're a person I could talk to easily for 10 hours straight, I'd really like to then give you a chance to offer, because you're thinking about these things differently. You're coining some different terms that you've come up with, like this therapeutic nurturing and secure fullness. So tell us a little bit about how your thinking differs and what you're trying to offer the space.
So, when I first started trying to understand more about mindfulness, I learned mindfulness in a really strange way. Like, I learned mindfulness in a southern West Coast California kind of way, not a northern East Coast kind of way. It was very sort of booga booga and spiritual, but basically it was guided meditations. And when I was doing the guided meditations, I was struck by how familiar it was when I was in labor. So I happened to be somebody who didn't want to be in pain. When I was taking my classes for how to do labor, they did the muscle test, right? So they were like, put your fingers together and pinch your muscles. And like, it really hurt. And then I'm like, now loosen it. And it didn't hurt. So the whole goal of labor was to be like the consistency of overcooked spaghetti. Like, I just went in and I was able to go as floppy as possible. When I first started meditating, I was like, this is exactly how I felt when I was giving labor, and also when I was nursing my children. So always in the back of my head, I'm like, these have got to be connected. So when I started doing my research for my master's thesis, which is like the weirdest math thesis, it was creative and contemplative meditation for people with dissociative identity disorder. Like, it's the strangest. But my first book is basically the information I came from my master's thesis. But really, in understanding, getting to know mindfulness, this is when I started to understand that it really isn't about calming the monkey mind, that mindfulness is nurturing. And it is part of the nurturing brain. Now, mindfulness is traditionally thought of as a singular practice, as an individual practice. We got to remember, when Buddha started talking about this, it was an incredibly misogynistic time, and Buddha himself said that women shouldn't be meditating. I think meditation, the purest form of meditation that we can have, when we're in the deep meditative state, that is actually the language of the Homo sapien mother. And that if the community holds her and helps her and supplies her with those resources, which they're supposed to do, then the mother can do this amazing job of constantly regulating herself and her child in a way that makes us make that meditative state permanent or consistent. And so, like, I think that if nurturing, or if safety and security was promoted, a lot more people would just automatically flip into a mindful state. Because hypnosis, which is also connected to mindfulness, is one of the things that helps us heal. And the way that we understand hypnosis and mindfulness isn't the way that I understand it. I understand mindfulness to be an adult version, and hypnosis to be a child or a vulnerable person's notion of how a baby and a mother sync up so that they communicate both physiologically and mindfully. So that mother's brain starts to understand her physiology and her infant's physiology as they communicate together. And from that place, this is where securefulness came from. This is where therapeutic nurturing was born, and where my job as a therapist is to assist the people that I work with in learning how to regulate them. So basically, securefulness is me in a mindful state, using mindful properties, using mindful mechanisms to tap into another person and then assist them regulating. So when I'm connected with somebody, when I'm working with them, I'm using my intuition, I'm using my interoception, I'm using my capacity to regulate my fear responses, I'm using my capacity to regulate my emotional system, I'm using my capacity to attune to that other person and use empathy for that other person and gather data. And so I am in a very mindful state when I'm with somebody. And so when they start to get scared or upset, or they are scared and upset, it's much easier for me to figure out what's going on inside of them. And then I start helping them put words, meaning, and context to their physiology, not what's going on in the mind. Because when people are dissociated or when people are scared, the body and the mind, they disconnect. And the mind starts to just regurgitate often the words and the environment that was going on when that injury happened. Right? So a lot of times our clients will say the exact same words that were said to them when they were being abused when that particular fear response comes up. So I'm not necessarily paying attention to what people think. I'm paying attention to what they feel. And when I'm in a mindful state, it works. So I use therapeutic nurturing. I do a lot of shushing. I do a lot of rocking. I do a lot of holding. I do a lot of the base soothing that we needed when we were infants and children. But I try to do it in a way that is aligned with the person in front of me. So I'm not like infantilizing my clients. I'm not breaking boundaries. I'm not forcing my way, because none of those things align with nurturing. Right? Pushing an agenda on someone, you can start to tell that they get upset, right? It's the upset that drives me, not the goal. So it is really in that moment working with people, trying to help them feel as safe as possible, as secure as possible, and helping them learn to nurture feelings.
Well, and I'm assuming when you're saying your role as a therapist is shushing and rocking, I'm not, you might, I mean, there are people that touch, there's different types of touch work and things, but I'm assuming you're talking metaphorically, or are you talking literally?
So it's been a while since COVID happened, I do only work online. But when I was in with sessions, yeah, I'd like swaddle people up in blankets and I would sit on them like it was just like pressure. And but the way that it was done, it was like done extraordinarily clinically and with permission. And like people know the difference. They might not know the difference, but the body knows the difference when it's being pushed. There are some people I've never touched. There are some people that I have touched. But when it's online, it is me instructing them to rock themselves. It's me instructing them to hold a pillow. But the way that it works is like, I work in like these small little moments. So if I can tell somebody's getting upset, I will say, it seems like you're getting upset. Do you notice anything changing inside of you? This is where I'm heavily influenced by sensorimotor psychotherapy, right? And so we're paying attention to what's going on in the body. And then I'm saying, okay, so before we go on with what's going on in your mind, can we take a moment and see if we can settle the body a little bit? So I might invite them to put a pillow in front of them. If it's a big emotional expression, so the wailing or the crying or the shaking, which is part of sort of the processing, the waking up phase of healing, then I will instruct people to like rock or move quite a bit, just so that they can sort of not, their freak out doesn't freak them out to make them freak out more, right? That their freak out starts to be seen as actually a healing process. Because healing actually really hurts. Healing is extraordinarily difficult and it's very messy. And we live in a world that tells us that healing should be sort of quiet and I feel better and it's okay, when actually healing is like bawling and crying and coming to the realization and feeling what you feel and then nurturing what is there. Eventually, over time, it's kind of like if you've been starving for a long time and you start to eat, your body's going to respond really weird as it tries to heal itself. And it's the same when you start to introduce any type of nurturing. The body's going to respond as it tries to heal. And so with therapeutic nurturing, it's like if tear is coming up, the knowledge is that tear is healthy. If anything that comes up is an attempt at healing, not an attempt at getting worse.
Right. Okay. So gosh, there's so many things, and we're coming to the end of our time. Why don't we circle back to where you started? So you started with this, recognition that it took quite a bit of time in your own life to even just recognize that a certain traumatic event had landed, right? And this is not uncommon. And I know it gets into messy spaces with recovered memories and all of that, thing that we've struggled.
Yeah, I'm actually very educated in recovered memories. Most of the people that started that were suspected to be perpetrators or known to be perpetrators. And there was a lot of, it was pretty sketchy. and they picked on a lot of victims. So like there is no such thing. There's delayed memories, but the recovered memory movement was very Darvo filled and gaslighting filled, right? So it is well known that dissociation does cover up things that are too big and too hard. We know that people who are in war dissociate what the violence that they do, and we don't question that. We know that people in car accidents don't remember, and we don't question that. We only question sexual assault survivors.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's
so
confusing for the public, right? This is why I'm always trying to
yeah.
like,
Yeah.
we spend our days, in CE trainings and with literature, and then people hear these things on TikTok or
Yeah.
social media, and they're trying to gather information.
Right.
It's not as robust. So I had somebody just even this last week ask me, well, is it important that I remember, and what's, they were bringing up this recovered memory type of stuff that they were scared of. And I was like, oh, well, that's different than, just letting your system kind of and things come up over time. And
I don't remember it very well. I don't think I ever will remember it very well. It was an extraordinarily violent thing that happened to me. He groomed me for about 6 months. I don't really remember like what he looked like. I remember seeing a weird image from the top corner of a room. So I was looking down at something happening. There's a flash of a stapler. And the thing that I do remember is really, really strange. I remember a little girl who swam like I did, had the same body, but she had like a weird haircut. So like memories are not the important part here.
mm-hmm.
Memories, the demand for memories comes from perpetrators as a way to defend them. When it comes to the other side of the aisle, when it comes to really understanding what happens to us, it is my feelings that drive the train. It is a visceral knowing. It is a reaction when I see anything that has to do with eyes going black. Like there's a boatload of evidence, and dissociation is one of them, right? We don't dissociate when we're safe and secure. Period. End of story. Dissociation itself is a powerful, powerful, powerful form of evidence, and it is measurable. Dissociative identity disorder, that's the closest diagnosis in the DSM to having a biomarker. It is very valid and reliable. When we look at it through multiple ways like blood tests and fMRIs, it can be found. Whereas something like ADHD, it doesn't have the same evidence, right? So the one thing that everybody sort of gives the most discredit to is actually the one that has the most credibility. So we understand what trauma is. So like the memory, I don't hold on to memory that much. I hold on to how things feel. Yeah. And I'm safe in my body again. I've been able to be back in my athletics. I've gone back to being an athlete again. I do Ironmans and half Ironmans for fun. Right? So I can go into a pool and not get triggered at all. I can even, my physiology doesn't respond the same way it used to. When my heart rate got high when I first started training again, my body would give me a stop and don't move. So I would just, even having a higher heart rate or higher temperature would make me dissociate. So that doesn't happen anymore. I can now have a high heart rate. I can, in the athletic world, it's like going to the pain cave. Before therapy, I couldn't handle the pain cave because it was too similar to what happened to me. But now I can, because my body is just like, oh yeah, we're fine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you're attributing your healing to a lot of these ideas that you're sharing with us today.
Absolutely. All of it. I attribute it to learning what meditation was and mindfulness was. I learned what it was going into my body. With sensorimotor, I learned how to become present with horrible, awful, terrible feelings, and then how to nurture those horrible, terrible, awful feelings. And after nurturing them long enough, the way that the body works with procedural memory and with procedural learning, my body no longer predicts death, and my body predicts life living. And so I don't get scared like I used to. I actually don't experience it ever. Yeah. Or if I do, I'm able to regulate it real quick, fast.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's powerful. And I guess you explained to us kind of the, because you said, well, I want to know why people can do this to somebody like me. And that was kind of the first part of this whole podcast, right? Was
how
people get to that position of Yeah, it's okay to be cruel and groom and hurt people, even though it's completely antithetical to, like you're saying, being a human.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you've given us a lot to think about for sure. Tell us about, I mean, I'm assuming your book has to do with all of these concepts,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
is that slated to come out? And tell us a little bit about that process.
I'm in the last final stages of editing. I have like serious writer head. I've been writing like 12 hours a day because I really want it done. I'm hoping to have a manuscript ready to go by mid-April.
Okay.
I'm probably going to give people a couple weeks. I have a couple people who want to read it, so they got a couple weeks. So I'm hoping that the book is ready to be published by somebody around May. But I'm not in sort of that's I don't have a publisher, I don't have an agent, but I do have a couple of plans. If this one doesn't work, then I will do this one. If this one doesn't work, then we'll do this one. But I'm really hoping to get the book out there as soon as possible because I feel urgent if in this climate and what's going on. It feels like such an urgent pull to help people see an entirely different perspective of our species, but also like what is entirely possible. We don't have to live like this. And
Yeah.
it's not even all that complicated.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it was really interesting too to hear you talk about patriarchy. I have a lot of empathy for, men in general, and
Yeah.
sometimes the patriarchy word, and you can feel like, oh, people just hate men. But when you start understanding both biology and environment and messaging and,
Yeah.
even the word, I mean, I really like the word toxic masculinity because I'm like, it's not that masculinity is toxic. It's like the way we frame masculinity can be toxic if you're taught I can only be a male in these particular ways or be masculine in these particular ways. So I really appreciated your kind of diving into the evolution and the science where we can say, no, this is not about being anti-man or anti-woman, or it's about systems and how they develop and how they've hurt us all.
Yes.
And even people who are, I would say, a lot of these people in power, even though they have a lot of privilege and maybe they're not that distressed, but I'm like, what a horrible way to live.
I couldn't imagine what it would like I don't think even like, using a Harry Potter theme. You remember like when Voldemort couldn't handle being in Harry Potter? Like he couldn't mind melt with Harry Potter because Harry Potter was so full of grief. Grief is love, right? Grief is visceral on a loss that is painful. I don't think I could dip a toe into the body of someone who is psychopathic or psychopathic adjacent because they are the epitome of human suffering. And we don't tend to look at them like that, right? They get elevated or they get seen as these strong, emotionless, fearless. And I think it would be brutal to be not human in a human body.
Mhm.
It's one of the reasons why I named the book The Craving, because we have a craving. Everybody has a craving, but it is a craving for safety and security. It's a craving for love and compassion and empathy and being soothed and being understood and being seen and being heard. And, I'm fairly enamored at the moment at Heated Rivalry. And I'm trying to figure out why I'm so enamored with Heated Rivalry. And it's not the sex stuff, because to me it's just like medical. But it's watching these two men love. And when they start to love, they're loving unencumbered. And I think that taps into a craving that I have to watch men love freely and fully and kindly and equally. And it just like gets me because we crave it.
Yeah.
And so that's why I named the book The Craving, because I really talk about why we have this craving. And if we all have it, it is possible to fill it and to feed it. It is possible for this to end.
Oh, what a beautiful way to end this discussion. Thank you, Christine, so much
You're
for
welcome.
and sharing your expertise, your time, your energy with us. I really appreciate it very much. And I wish you so well in your endeavors.
Thank you so very much.
Our paths cross again.
Yes, thank you so very much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Natasha Helfer Podcast. To help keep this podcast going, please consider donating at natashahelfer.com and share this episode. To watch the video of this podcast, you can subscribe to Natasha's channel on YouTube and follow her professional Facebook page at Natasha Helfer, LCMFT, CST-S. You can also find all her cool resources at natashahelfer.com. The information shared on this program is informational and should not be considered therapy. This podcast addresses many topics around mental health and sexuality and may not be suitable for minors. Some topics may elicit a trigger or emotional response, so please care for yourself accordingly. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or feelings of Natasha Helfer or the Natasha Helfer Podcast. We provide a platform for open and diverse discussions, and it is important to recognize that different perspectives may be shared. We encourage our listeners to engage in critical thinking and form their own opinions. The intro and outro music for these episodes is by Otter Creek. Thank you for listening.
There is a place where time slows to nature's pace, and there is space there to find yourself in her embrace. Some places should be left alone. Na tishki say the so we can always go to the homeland of the heart. 10,000 years of our human history etched on her canyon walls, alongside Earth's mysteries. Some places should be left alone. Nahotishki so we can always go to the homeland of the heart. To the homeland of the heart. Deep in our cities, we sleep without her stars, yet still her presence sustains us from afar. Some places should be left alone. Nahotishki so we can always go to the homeland of the heart, to the home.